I would like to welcome you all to our 60th anniversary fair and today's talk, Art Collectors in Conversation, Aaron Milrad, renowned collector, art supporter, and lawyer. He has written and lectured widely on copyright and art law. Aaron has also been a patron of TOA of artists since its early years, in many capacities, including the supporter of Best of Ceramics Award. These series are co-presented by the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery and moderated by Joshua Human, Curator of Education and Public Programs at the Power Plant. For this conversation, we were lucky enough to meet Aaron in his residence and in person, surrounded by his stunning and impressive art collection. Each piece here has been collected carefully with deep passion and commitment. Aaron is a captivating storyteller, and his passion for collecting is inspiring and contagious. I really hope you'll be inspired to embark on your own collecting journey after hearing this conversation. Enjoy.
My mother was interested in the decorative arts and had some paintings as well. That were Canadian. And one turned out to be by a woman who started the Women's Painting Committee or club to get proper recognition for women.
Right.
Because at that time, when a woman had an exhibition, it was always titled By a Lady. There's a book to that.
There is.
Yeah.
It's on my shelf.
Yeah. And so this lady from London, Ontario, was the leader, and my mother bought one of her works unknowingly of her own past, you know. Yeah.
Right.
And later on,
Yes.
I was involved in doing some work with Alfred University.
Oh, right.
And went down to Alfred and lectured there and met a number of the potters, and the same at Banff when I was teaching at Banff.
Oh, great.
And there were potters there as well. And I really got into pottery. I could do it for two reasons. One, I love the touch and feel of clay. That's why I don't collect glass. Glass says I'm beautiful, but don't touch me. Clay says pick me up. You know? One's warm, the other is not.
Yeah.
And I could afford it. You can get wonderful pieces of clay for nickels and dimes back then. And if you enjoyed that kind of stuff, you could pot it. I've got drawers full of stuff.
So I wonder,
by stuff, I mean functional wear,
right.
not artwork, but functional wear by the same artist who would do artwork, but also do functional wear, so that they would make plates, and they would make cups, and they would make saucers, and they would make other things that you could utilize on an ongoing basis. So I've got mugs, for instance, they're like $10 each, and they're handmade, and they're numbered and named, you know.
And they're unique.
They're unique.
They're not all, they're not just cookie cutter.
They're not off of the machine either.
Right.
Yeah.
So I wonder, you know, when we think about collecting, and your collection is varied. So you have, you know, 2-dimensional works, you have 3-dimensional works. But when you think back to the earliest, we'll say, urge to collect something, whether it was art or not art, what kind of collections did you have, we'll say, like as a child or as a youth?
Marbles.
Marbles.
Yeah.
So this is glass, which
Yeah.
now as an adult you don't collect.
Well, marbles came in different sizes, colors, and varieties. They were really interesting. And you could make a marble game that you could take to school, and kids would play your game, and you would win marbles off them. So I had sort of a wooden board with teeth, and you have to get a marble in between these teeth, you know. If you did, you get 3 for 1, that kind of thing. If you didn't, I got the marbles and I put them in my little leather purse, you know.
So
Want a marble?
you still have them? No, not anymore. So, you know, from marbles, what was sort of like the next logical step for you in terms of collecting? You know, like what is it that got you into collecting art?
It's a 2-part question. What got me into collecting? What got me into collecting art? I honestly believe you get into collecting by your character. You're born with it. You go somewhere and you have to have it. And you have to have 2 of them, 3 of them, 4 of them. And you have to stop somewhere when there's a fair on and go look at things. You have to have a curiosity and maybe a little bit of wanting things around you. And I attribute that maybe to some insecurity. I'm not a shrink. Maybe I need one. But I really attribute that to some insecurity that you get culture and warmth and friendship from having these things around you. Yeah.
There's a wonderful developmental psychologist named Abigail Housen who has been studying for decades at this stage what she calls aesthetic development. And she says that, that there are 5 levels, we'll say, of aesthetic development. And, for little kids, for people who, really just don't have time for art, it's, that's a car, it's a painting of a car, and that's it. But at some point, when you get to like levels 4 and 5 in her hierarchy, we'll say, it's a recognition that people develop a relationship with works of art. And so that sounds like to me what you're describing is, that these works of art, you select them, you feel this urge to possess them and to collect more of them, but that they inhabit your space and that they are friends. Do you feel that way about?
I do. Yeah. Look at the picture behind you. It's enveloping the room.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And I'll just say a tagline, a very beautiful painting by Joe Zalitsky. Your collection seems, I'll say, split into like 2-dimensional works and 3-dimensional works, and the 2-dimensional works are mostly paintings,
yes,
and the 3-dimensional works are mostly ceramic.
Yes.
So was there ever like a conscious thought about, like paintings instead of prints, paintings instead of drawings? And then on the 3-dimensional side, was there a decision specifically for ceramic as opposed to metal sculpture, glass sculpture, and so on?
No. A lot of it had to do with availability. What was being shown in Toronto primarily, and also quality. And price. Ceramics, as I mentioned, were so inexpensive compared to metal. I say to some of my ceramic friends that if you only did this in metal, you could charge times 10. And it's interesting that the same amount of effort and intelligence and integrity go into creating ceramics as would be creating anything in metal. Of course, with metal, you can make more complex things, large sculptures and so on. That people come and cut the heads off and destroy and tell you we don't want to see them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, clay was utilized as a functional art. If you go back in history, you'll find the remains of civilizations by the shards.
Yeah, every art history survey book, Jansen and so on, will have shards that have been pieced back together from the Minoans and all the different ancient Greek phases from Egypt, from Rome, and so on.
And that's very touching for me, that it's got the imprint of people from 2,000 years ago. And they used them. And it had wear. It was just not a decorative art that was on the shelf. And so you get the lifeblood of the civilization. And that's very meaningful.
And then on the two-dimensional side, I wonder what attracted you to certain styles or painters even. So I know, for example, David Mirvish Gallery featured, fairly significant in Toronto's art scene at the time. We'll say, what's that, late 60s, 70s, just into the 80s. And he was really showing a lot of the, we'll say, like later abstract expressionists and the post-painterly abstraction artists. Was that sort of like the selection of galleries is what determined to some extent what was like available for you to collect? Is that like a fair assessment?
Yes and no. Yes, in that Mirvish had a tremendous impact on me. But no, there were other galleries around at the same time, like Walter Moses Gallery and Albert White's Gallery and other galleries that were showing really impressive art, British painting and sculpture, and Jared Sable was showing a lot of pop art and so on. So I had to make value judgments for me, because we had, back then, I think, a better art scene than we do now. And I don't quite know the reason why. Somebody said it has to do with HST and having to pay it before you can bring shows in, exhibitions in private galleries and so on. I don't know. But I do know that we had Mira Goddard and we had really wonderful shows and wonderful exhibitions. And you didn't have to leave Toronto to see great art. I think David was 18 years of age when he opened his gallery. Pretty close to
that.
18 or 19. David never went beyond high school. But David is a unique creature. He's an amazing young man. He's not so young anymore, but anybody younger than me is young. They can be 60 and still be young. I think David's a little older than 60. I was so taken with David. I used to come to the gallery and bring my family to the gallery many Saturdays. And the kids grew up going to David Mirvish's gallery and some others, but primarily David Mirvish's gallery. His gallery was a wonderful work of art, designed by wonderful architects. David had and has great taste. And he also happens to have the money to enable that taste to happen. And if you can combine the two, you get some great artwork. If you can hire, a great architect at a price that a great architect charges, and then have it filled with great art, hey, that's terrific.
What's better than that?
What's better than that? Yeah. And he has patience, a lot of patience. And I think when he went and visited the artists for the gallery, they must have been, and I was never there, but they must have been impressed with David and prepared to show in his gallery and knew that he paid his bills. And so we had access to some of the finest art of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. being made in America. People used to come from America to Toronto to buy art from David. Oftentimes, the art wasn't available in the US. It was bought up by the rich and famous Americans. And so if you're down a rung, you'd come up here and see if you could buy some of the art that's available. And David had enough money to be able to impress the artist to continue with him. And so you had a continuum going on so that you could find different works of the artist from different periods and available. Sometimes it's sold out, but initially available.
Yeah, I mean, the works were so large
Yeah.
by some of those artists that his gallery space would be filled with, 10 works would fill the whole space.
Right. Yeah.
So if you weren't in there in the first hour or two, you might miss out.
Well, being a dealer, he was very careful in what he bought or brought in. I think to a large extent, he had to buy art to get that art there, and then he resold the art. As compared to other dealers who didn't have the money and brought art in on consignment. When you're an artist and David can come to your gallery and say, I'll buy these 12 pictures. It's a pretty good day. You've got that month full. And it was always a joy working with him and with his assistant, Elkis Konaridis, who was a friend of David's, but also amazingly interested in art, very deeply interested in art. And you could sit and talk with these people. And also David would put on an opening party or an opening dinner. And if you were a collector that bought from David, you'd often get invited. And you got to meet Frank Stella and Jill Zolitsky and Ken Noland and Stella and people of that kind. And you walk out of there and say, boy, I just spent an evening with Frank Stella. In other fields, it's like saying, I just spent time with this fantastic banker.
Stephen Hawking or some amazing physicist or scientist. Yeah, right.
And these are memories that you will treasure, you'll cherish them.
And not that I'm advocating for or against galleries. I mean, I would say I have had wonderful experiences in commercial galleries, but I wonder about the role of a gallerist in, as you would say, having a good eye and curating, shows of, we'll say like worthy artists, or artists worthy of attention. Is that a role that you think remains necessary or vital today? Or has subjectivity risen to such a level where people simply don't like to be told what they should be looking at or not looking at?
Well, there's a simple solution. There's an artist now who just got $18,000 for creating an invisible work of art. There it is. You can have an invisible gallery.
Yeah, well, I always like to say that way back when Yves Klein sold his sincerity in the form of gold leaf. And I think Yves Klein also sold space imbued with his artistic creativity.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'm just familiar with the blue women's bodies.
Yes, yeah, anthropomorphy. So I wonder, so right behind you is a great example of three-dimensional ceramic in your collection.
Yeah, marvelous artist, marvelous subject.
Marvel, and the subject is you.
Yeah.
So I wonder, so obviously to have this in your collection means that you know that artist, that you formed a relationship with that artist enough to commission that work.
Right.
So could you talk a little bit about that process, what that's
It was serendipitous. in working at the outdoor art show, looking around, trying to choose winners of the ceramic award, I came across this woman who did these artworks. They're paper. And I saw she had done a number of sculptures of people. And I asked her if she would ever do a commission. And she said, sure. I said, come on, come to my office, which she did the next day or two. And she looked at me, took a couple of photographs and said, okay, I'll make something. And if you like it, you can buy it. And she did, and I did. Yeah. And I've been looking for her ever since. I can't find her. I've looked everywhere. I have all kinds of people looking for her. She may have died.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I think.
I hope I'm not saying something wrong. Not meant to be.
Well, I'll say, I think the Toronto Outdoor Art Fair staff should try to track her down.
Yeah, because I wanted her to do a work of my wife, which sadly never happened. And my wife died in the meantime. So it would be nice to have it around.
Well, still, maybe as a tribute. So, I wonder, because this is a subject that some collectors are not always so comfortable talking about, but when it comes to matters of legacy, I wonder, has your collection evolved over time with works being sold or donated or traded?
All of the above.
All of the above?
Yeah.
And then, and sort of like, are there any examples that you could, easily sort of like talk about of, like why a certain work didn't feel like it belonged with you anymore?
What's even harder to discuss is a work of art that did belong and did feel right with me, but I needed the money and I had to sell it because there was somebody around who wanted to buy it. It's like selling a piece of property. Although you don't call it a property the same way, I don't think. The attitude I had and still have is that I'm not an owner. Works are here temporarily. They're entitled to move on and should move on. I'm a custodian, not an owner. And if you start with that attitude, then two things happen. Number one, you cherish the work more because you know it's here temporarily. And two, when you do sell it, you feel kind of good. It's going to another home. It'll go through another life. And that's really important for the work.
To know that it's going to someone else who hopefully loves it as much.
Because works have life. Not only do I have a life, the work has a life. It should have a life moving on and ultimately end up in an institution, in their basement probably.
And I guess that's, that is a question. So here, I have a history now of 20 years of working in museums. Most of those museums have had collections. And so, to be fair to the notion of institutional critique, I think, some institutions are gatherers of objects, even if they know that those objects may never see the light of day again. So I wonder, as someone with a collection, have you thought about, are there particular works in your collection that you would really like to see go into a museum versus other works that you feel should have a life, in some other way with, with collectors or with friends or with family and so on?
I can answer that in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
On 25 years ago, I joined up with a law firm that was one of the high-end law firms in Toronto. They offered me an opportunity to be there. And nobody in the firm had been involved in art law. Very few lawyers have been involved in art. You really don't make as much money as you do if you're involved in corporate or tax or things that bring in money. And one of the reasons I went there to this firm, not only because it was a fine firm, is that they would let me hang parts of my art collection in the firm. And so initially I put up art in my own office, and then in and around my office, and then further afield, and then on other floors. And after about 100 odd works around the wall, it became an art collection that they didn't want to see it disappear. And I used to do art tours. I could take people around and show them the art. But better than that, I could even have 2 or 3 of the artists whose works were in the collection come with me on the art tour and talk about why this work is what it is and why it is. And that gave a whole new dimension to the firm, and especially to the young people who were articling and joining the firm. They wanted to know about this kind of thing. You know, when you go into a law firm and it's got art on the wall, most of the art relates to law. So you see old deeds from properties from the 1800s, or pictures of former partners in the law firm, or of judges, you know. I made them take all that. I made them take all that down to make room for my art. And I took one floor that had no art in it at all, where all the people working there were on software and hardware, nothing to do with the law, but having to do with all the substructures. And I put artwork up there. And the smiles on the faces of these people was worth it. Nobody had ever paid attention to them. And here they had this lovely art. But I always asked, are you content with this wall having this work of art? If you're not, I won't put it up. I'll put something else up with your permission. And it got to the point where when one assistant was moving, we had moved from across the street from the First Canadian place to the TD Center. And she said, I'm only moving if this Paul Fournier painting on the wall here comes with me. And you've got to hang it up opposite my desk. Okay. Some years later, her lawyer was retiring from the firm. And they wanted her to then be available to other lawyers. Needless to say, the artwork had to go with her. The day came when she resigned from the firm. And she came up to me and said, will you ever consider selling this work of art? It was a work by Paul Fournier. It was not a multi-mega purchase. And I said to her, yes, I would, because I must own 30 or 40 of his works. And she said, would you ever sell it to me? I said, well, I'd like you to know something about the art and the artist. Give me your phone number. And I called her at home and I said, are you free for lunch on Thursday? Okay, come on down. We're going to meet you at High's restaurant at 12 o'clock. I had arranged for Paul Fournier to join us. And she came in and I introduced her to Paul Fournier. She started to cry. And Paul Fournier was so impressed that somebody really understood, reached out, and felt it in the heart, not just in the pocketbook. And she said, how much would this work be worth? I had discussed this with Paul Fournier before. I owned the work. And he said, well, that work would probably sell for about 45. So I said to her, how much do you have available to buy an artwork? She said, $2,300. I said, it's amazing because that's exactly the price of this work. And I had Paul sign a card for her, signed on the back, picture. And for $2,300, she took the artwork and came home as her on her wall.
Oh, that's such a lovely story.
Isn't that a nice
That's
story?
such a lovely story.
Yeah.
It's really
And
like,
I would do it again.
yeah, it's really allowing someone who has a connection with a work to be able to embrace it and live with it.
She exemplified everything I wanted to see happen.
So of course, you know, that I'll say brings me to my final question, which is, what are your aspirations for all the various objects in that you have collected over the years, anticipating that unfortunately this story won't be repeated for each one of those works? So, you know, how do you envision the future of Mr. Aaron Milrad's collection?
Right, I'm going to take them all and I'll have a bonfire. I have been giving away art to galleries for a long time. I've always made that a sort of a practice, that we should have an example of these works that I collect. In recent years, it was photography, contemporary photography, much of it American, because they seem to be there first, you know. And they welcomed the contemporary photography, especially color photography. That was really a tough one. For many years, museums thought color photography was for tourists, you know, taking pictures when you're on vacation. Until some young photographers came along and impressed the Museum of Modern Art. And the art ended up in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art.
And I'll give credit where credit is due to Ann Tucker at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, who was one of the first curators of photography in a museum. Started, I think, in 1976, I'm going to say.
Well, there was a gentleman before her who has a European name, a lot of Z's and stuff. I can't remember his name, but he must have had a remarkable eye and an understanding of new technology. I visited a collector in upstate New York, whose house is really a museum of photography. He has gone back, as you can, and this is the only art form that I'm aware of that you can go back to the beginning. And he has photography from day one. He's got it in drawers in his bedroom. He's got it everywhere. But it goes right back to the beginning of photography. And I would love to see a photography museum like that. The only one I've been to in recent years was the one down in Rochester.
Yeah, Eastman Kodak.
Yeah. And I think Paul Roth here at Ryerson is doing a hell of a job collecting photography. Not only collecting photography, but explaining.
Yeah, Doina Popescu, who of course was the founding director, and now Paul Roth, director of the Ryerson Image Center.
Yeah, or whatever they're going to call the school.
Yes.
That's another can of worms.
Issue to be resolved.
Yeah, right. So I guess my answer to you in an obtuse way is I've always had my eye on removing works from my collection in a positive fashion to enhance the collection elsewhere, but also to enhance the reputation of the artist. Because if you can say that your works are now in the museum of A and B and C and D, that's really helpful for your market. And since I work in that area, or I did work in that area for years, I thought I should give back in a way that would be positive. Everybody was a winner. I was a winner. I got a tax receipt. The museum was a winner. The artist was a winner. The people visiting were winners. Everybody came out winners. It's pretty rare in any business at that situation. Normally there's a loser somewhere in there, you know. Maybe the government of Canada when it came to tax receipts. But not there, because in essence, it was an educational tool. It educated the people of Canada. You know, until you saw photography in a museum, you didn't recognize photography as an art form. It was just something you could do yourself. I can do that. Oh yeah, try it. Right? So I've always had my eye on disposal on an ongoing basis. And I'm still doing that. I'm still gathering in tax receipts. But ultimately, much of the art I've given to my children, and I will allow my executors to deal with the art because I'm going to be gone. And I have executors that I trust have the same outlook as I do. I can give them directions and they will. But I have no idea as to what will be able to be done. Sometimes you think artwork that you collect is really wonderful by a particular artist. And I'll give you an example behind me. And other times, not a lot of people think the same way as you do. But that doesn't mean it's good or bad. I mean, when you get to a certain level of art, the art's got to be pretty good, you know? And if you don't like the art, then maybe it's breaking new territory. Maybe it's breaking new territory. I mean, nobody liked the Group of Seven or the Painters 11. And going back to the French, the Salon de Refusé.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Yeah. They are meant to challenge us. They have some vision that we don't.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with such wisdom and really such beautiful stories.
By the way, everything I told you is a lie.
Well, I truly appreciate your time.
I didn't give you a cookie.
But also, I mean, your investment in, in really supporting artists and having such a holistic vision of, the role of a collector.
Yeah.
In, we'll say, embracing works for a time, but thoughtfully thinking about where these works will continue to be.
Yeah. Disposal is really as important as acquisition.